the way we do things teaches people, you're the consumer and the professionals stand on stage. And
Right.
I think Jesus would have laughed at that. Like that would have just been silly to him.
Hey, my name's Zach, and what you're about to hear is a real conversation from inside our church. We're not presenting a model to copy or a solution to export. We're telling a story we're still living, shaped by our people and our place and our questions. Some of it's clear, and a lot of it's unfinished, but it's honest, and it's rooted in our desire to follow Jesus faithfully, right where we're at. So enjoy.
So we're trying to figure this thing called church out, following Jesus. And so we find ourselves as leaders of this church that goes by the nomenclature Trellis, and we have switched models in this last year. So can you tell me a little bit about how we were doing church 3 years ago versus how we're doing church now?
Yeah, I mean, 3 years ago, I think it was like, for anyone who's spent any time in the like Western evangelical church, it would just be that, like what we expect, come in and participate in a, 90-minute worship service on Sundays. That is like just what you'd expect, worship and prayer and communion and
Come
teaching.
in, slides, announcements, 2 songs, one upbeat, one a
Right.
bit slower.
Right.
A 30-ish minute sermon,
Right.
and some other songs at the end, and goodbye.
Yeah, and while there might have been some sort of variety there, it's like, 90% of the people walking in the doors would have known generally what to expect there. And then, outside of those Sunday mornings, still like a lot of what would be expected. So, encouraging people to belong to community groups, home groups, cell groups, like, there's a bajillion names for what churches call those, but like generally get together once a week with a smaller group, oftentimes pretty homogenous groups in terms of like, senior adults are in this group, and there's a ladies group, and there's a men's group, and there's like a group that attracts young families.
It has all the children.
Like a group that seems to draw, young single adults. Like there's just like a lot of homogeneity in those groups. And then, outside of that, we do a quarterly outreach event where everyone comes to the building and the staff do all the work, and then we recruit volunteers to come and pull something off. And so, just I think like a lot of, traditional...
What we grew up with as church.
Yeah. And then contrast that to like how we do now. I don't know, do you want me to tell like part of the journey of like the why behind transition, or just first paint the picture of like what is now?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm I think interested in is we've gone through a full season of now doing it. I've like cutely called it season 1.
Yeah.
Like we had our alpha season, and then we
Right.
have season 1, we took our break, and now we're in season 2, and thinking through the lessons and the why, and maybe just revisiting, restoring, like going back and reliving the transition again.
Yeah.
Maybe we can pick up some new things that we missed the first time,
Yeah.
now having experienced what we thought we were traveling into.
Right. I mean, context is important because we're in the Pacific Northwest, just outside of Seattle. We're not in the Bible Belt. We are like literally miles from where the first COVID case was. And one of the geographic areas where there was like the most stringent lockdowns. And that's not like a political comment, that's just a reality
Right.
of like where we found ourselves. And so coming out of that,
I mean, context, we were a church in the box for 20 years.
yeah,
Me and you were part of it in different ways, and now
Yeah.
find ourselves at the center of it, which is
Right.
really fun.
right.
And when COVID hit, the school that we were part of for how long we were there for?
Oh yeah, quite a few years. I mean,
Yeah.
on most of a decade or more at a local middle school. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
They're like, thank you so much for your patronage, but everything shut down. No school,
Yeah,
no
right.
churches,
Right.
nothing's happening at the building.
Right.
And so we found ourselves homeless.
Right. Yeah, and through a pretty, ended up buying a building, but a building that needed lots of remodeling to fit the needs of a church and code and all of that kind of stuff. And so for 18 months met on Sunday nights at another church that was really generous and kind to us. We had our stuff in storage. We officed out of a storage facility, basically.
Good times.
Yeah, and then, 2023 is when we transitioned to the building. So it was like, in that time that I think, I think there's like a handful of factors. I think regardless of political perspectives, people were lonely and isolated coming out of an extended season of working from home, living at home, not going out to restaurants, not going to entertainment, like the things that people normally find community in, they couldn't find community in. Right. So tons of loneliness and isolation. There's this thing called the Seattle freeze where it's like, there's so much transition, people coming and going all the time.
And
there's
commuting culture.
Right. And I think the intent is generally there of like, hey, you're new to the area, like let's go grab a beer, let's grab coffee, let's meet up for dinner. And then nothing happens, and then people feel like lonely and isolated. And weather contributes, like it's kind of a perfect storm of sorts.
Pun intended.
Yeah, that's right. So I think for me it was like a lot of people get to like a house church type model, which we'll talk about in just a second, from like doing theological work. And they go to scripture and like doctrinally and theologically, they're like, no, this is the way that the church is supposed to be.
Right.
And that doesn't.
House to house and in Solomon's colonnade. And like this is the model set for us in Acts. And therefore, if we're doing anything else from that, we're doing it wrong.
Right.
And we came from a different perspective.
Right. Which I understand. The problem with that is like, they didn't have air conditioning and heating and, sound systems and lights and all of this stuff. And so if we're going to do it like them, then there's lots of other things that we need to quit and give up on. So for me, and I think part of our journey was less about theology, less about doctrine, less about like, this is the way that it needs to be. It wasn't like an idealist, dogmatic. It was more asking the question in this place and this time for Trellis Church, what we're seeing going on in our culture and our society around us, in a very, very unchurched area where there's skepticism towards the church, where there's hurt and frustration towards the church, large churches in this area over the last couple decades shutting down and people not having a church community anymore, like all kinds of things like led to the question, so what? Like do we, the transition to the new building, other transitions going on, like it's just a great time to ask the question, what are we doing? How are we doing it? And is it effective?
What's the end goal? What's the purpose?
Right. And so, through a variety of like connections to other churches, through reading, some of Francis Chan, through a trip down to a church in Texas called Church Project in Houston, like through a lot of different resources, just landed on the idea that like our small gatherings during the week need to become priority and they need to look different than they do right now. And even as I say that, there's this like, oh my goodness, someone's going to listen to this and be like, oh, he's saying what was being done was terrible and it was wrong. And like, there's none of that. It wasn't a judgment about right and wrong. It was just like, there's more opportunity here.
Right.
Both for those of us inside the church who care deeply about, gathering in smaller groups during the week and as means of like connecting with the culture and society around us. And so, the idea was, becoming this like church of house churches where, initially actually I was like, maybe we'll just gather twice a month. And, understandably, people don't like, quite that much change. Yeah.
Just take the wheel and just, whoosh!
And for better and for worse, and oftentimes it's for worse. I'm just someone who doesn't mind risk, and I like, turning things upside down and shaking them out and see what stays, And so through months of conversation among staff, among elders, inviting the church body into that conversation, which was also hard, change, the church doesn't do change very well.
Nope.
Which,
good and bad. But it's hard not to look at like what Jesus did with his disciples over a handful of years and be like, man, like everything changed for them. Yes.
And I'm not saying change for change's sake, though I can be like, I can be guilty of that. And so I'm not arguing for that. I'm just saying like comfort, predictability, stability doesn't seem to align itself with like Jesus' invitation to discipleship and apprenticeship.
Fair. Well, then for our context in particular, we're coming off of new building. We decided to shift our name. We like had staffing shifts. Like there was a lot of change happening, and then we just slid this across the table and said, "Hey, we see that you're lonely, and that you need community, and that what the mediums that we're using right now aren't really itching the scratch that we need. So what about this?"
Right.
And for as much change as we were in, like our body was willing and open, and to like, we had our own pushback, and we had our own conversations around a lot of tables and groups, but we're here, like season 2.
And, like another factor in this is for a smallish church, we're very spread out in a heavily populated region with very high cost of living, lots of traffic, all of that kind of stuff. And so then the question also becomes, for 100 or so adults spread out over, like a...
Was that 300 square miles?
300 square miles or something like that. How do we do more than just come together for 90 minutes on Sunday in a way that advances the kingdom and the gospel and like lives a life that Jesus invites us into? And so that was like another huge factor. And so really where we settled was like, the phrase we use is we're a church of house churches. That's borrowed, from others. There's not really any original ideas when it comes to church anymore. But that we would still gather on Sundays, and that is a really important time. And Jesus gathered in big groups to teach and, worship and among other things. And so we still do that every Sunday. I don't know if it's fair to say the focus, but maybe the priority, or maybe just what we see is a unique factor that sets Trellis apart, is like we want to lift up and, if anything, make much of our gatherings outside of Sunday mornings, which happen now in 6 house churches spread out among the region, where we have moments of silence together, extended times of prayer, or we worship, where we do very significant like check-ins, where we do scripture reading and conversation around the scripture, but oftentimes maybe that's not 90% of the time, like it is in a lot of other community groups. It's like, come in, sit down, read a scripture, answer 12 questions that someone else wrote, look up at the clock and like, oh shoot, we need to hurry up and get home. So we like, popcorn prayer for 12 seconds and then we move out. We're saying like we still hold scripture in really high esteem and have really high value, but that's not going to dominate our time together at the cost of these other things that feel really important. And then the other thing we did, which maybe was like the most challenging for us, was like, hey, church, consider stop going to the group that you're going to right now. And move to the group that is most closely geographically located to your home, which also then like forces diversity and other things like that. And maybe that was the most, for some, the most.
Because I've been going to the same group for 15 plus years. And I know these people. I'm comfortable with these people. And there's validity in that. Like I have friends that I've kept for that long, and to say like, oh, you can't be friends with them anymore. And we're like, no, we're not saying don't be friends with them. Like, all we're just saying is, I believe you read a bunch of statistics when we were going through the shift about like what keeps lasting and deep relationships together. And one of them was like you see them in your neighborhood. There's a proximity effect that happens.
Yeah, the chance of bumping into someone at a grocery store, at the gas station, or those kinds of things help. It increases the possibility that that's going to become a deep and meaningful relationship that goes beneath just a surface level. Like, hey, how are you doing? How's your week? Where we all have like rehearsed answers to that. And so that's like what we were hoping for. But again, we also live in a culture and society where people don't like being told what to do. And so,
Yep.
some of the adverse reaction is just like, don't tell me what to do. I'm like, okay.
Fair. Like,
right. So yeah, we're now, we launched in May of 2025, had kind of an extended run through 2025. We break 2 months of the year. So, at the time of us shooting this at the end of January 26th, we've just kind of recently come back from taking the month of December off to be with family and celebrate holidays and all that kind of stuff. And as you said, season 2 is kind of just like now we're jumping back into where we left off and lessons learned and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things I'd be interested to hear you reflect on, thinking about, like, just context. We are in the same house church, even though I live 45 minutes away, because it's the closest house church that's to me.
Right.
Is what can we do in these house churches around the table that we can't do on a Sunday morning on the stage?
Yeah, I think a few things come to mind. One, I would say depth of relationship. Even in a smaller church like Trellis with maybe 100 adults on a Sunday, there's a lot going on. People are in and out. People who have kids are like, I need to get my kids home for naps. If, the Seahawks are playing, then there's a football game at 12:30, so everyone wants to rush out of here. Like, there's just a lot of things that inhibit not real relationship, but more like depth of relationship.
Yeah.
So that depth can come in a smaller group around a table where you're not in an environment where other things are expected of you,
Right.
and you just get to kind of exist and coexist with others. So I'd say depth of relationship. I would say there's a handful of spiritual practices or disciplines that form us and shape us. Silence being one of them, and silence can happen on Sundays, and it does happen here at Trellis.
Right.
But there's also like what people expect in terms of like an order of service and how those things go.
Yep.
And there is some wisdom, even for someone like me who likes to, buck the status quo a little bit, of like there's some wisdom in not having people come in every Sunday being like, what in the heck is going to happen today?
Here we go.
Right.
Yeah.
And so keeping to some of those routines and traditions, I think is a good, healthy thing. So moments of silence, which can be meaningful for prayer. It can be meaningful for discerning the voice of the Spirit. It can be meaningful when someone shares like, hey, I'm in a crummy season of life and this is what's going on. Let's take a moment of silence and let's discern if the Lord is using someone in the group to speak to that person. And when there's 10 or 12 or 14 people, 8 people around a table, that like makes sense.
Right.
And it works. When there's 100 people in a worship service on Sunday, that it just doesn't work very well.
Yeah. It can, but it's just different.
Yeah. Practicing the spiritual gifts, for sure. Similarly, like that can happen on a Sunday, but it's hard.
Right. There's a lot more like describing what's going on, getting people up to speed. But when you're traveling with your church in your area, like you've already crossed all the boundaries of and descriptions of things, and there's a growing trust of actually just practicing instead of like, oh, I have to get this right, or like, oh, I'd be looked weird. Like, no, I know you.
Right.
I've walked with you through this entire experience. And so, yeah, when you feel like you have a scripture that comes to mind or like a word or an image, like, I'm like, sure, like I'll listen to that.
Right.
Not some person I haven't met.
Right. Well, and it's just, it's so much easier to be organic and flexible with 10 people than it is with 100 people.
Right.
Because on a Sunday morning, somebody has planned a 40-minute sermon. The band has planned an order of songs. We've planned, there's a plan in place.
Right.
And so diverting from that, like, it makes people do weird things.
No.
You've experienced that recently, right? Like going from I planned 40 minutes for a sermon and now I've got 30. And so we just there's more to work through where, in a house church setting, it's so much easier to be flexible and organic. And so I would say like speaking words of exhortation, prophetic words, sharing an image or a vision that the Spirit brings to mind, or that you don't know if the Spirit brought to mind, and you're just like, I'm going to throw this out there, and I'm going to see if it sticks, and discerning that in a community and a group. I I mean, this is going to probably freak some people out, the practice of like speaking in tongues and interpretation. Well,
Yeah, that would freak a lot of people out, specifically if you just busted it out on like
Right.
any given Sunday morning.
and while I don't think there's a lot of house churches at Trellis that have like that regular practice, like again, that's just not going to happen on a Sunday morning. And so this does provide a space where we can more appropriately
Right.
take risks and practice those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the things I've been thinking about is, as a community, we have one stage. Like it's 14 inches, but that 14 inches like makes you a weird, like an uncomfortable amount of authority if you just step up there. And on a gathering that's, hour and a half, you can only have so many voices speaking.
Right.
When we moved to geographical locations and said, hey, like we believe you are the church, and we placed someone that cares for you in place and a host that's there to like facilitate your gathering. There's just places for people to become true apprentices and to lead out. And it's not just the few paid professionals like me and
Right.
you or whoever else is on the stage.
Right.
It's an opportunity to actually see the church be, what's the fancy words for the priesthood of all believers.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about our structure in Western evangelicalism that teaches, though often not verbally, but like the way we do things teaches people, you're the consumer and the professionals stand on stage. And
Right.
I think Jesus would have laughed at that. Like that would have just been silly to him. I think even just of like where Jesus is like, no longer do I call you servants, I call you friends. Like
Right.
the invitation into that. And so if we want to represent that kind of idea, but like what's being communicated is like you sit and consume and take in, we really are saying like, there's just a few of us that have something to offer when we gather. And nobody would actually believe that, but that's how we operate.
Right.
A lot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and the irony of all this is not only is like Jesus probably against it, societally, like we've been pushing against authority for like
Yeah.
since the Enlightenment. Like the Enlightenment changed it so much, and systematically we're looking at authority and like distrusting it so much so that eventually we distrust ourselves as an authority.
Right.
And yet, functionally, we're saying pastor's in charge, and there's biblical reality to that.
Right.
But moving towards, this is where I will put a stake in the ground. I think
Yeah.
like a more closer to God's heart, which
Yeah.
is like the body of believers acting as Christ and like serving one another, not just coming to be served.
Yeah.
It gives, it oddly restructures the authority to like, yeah, you're in charge of yourself, and there's also stratification. That's not the wrong word.
Yeah.
There's safety nets of people who care for you.
Yeah, and I think though, honestly, I kind of hate this phrase. Like it kind of protects the church a little bit. One of these days I'll write a book called Stop, Protecting My Church, like from God's perspective. But what the priesthood of believers does is it like protects against the one person or the few with just ultimate power and authority for everything in the church. And it brings a diversity of perspectives at play on any given thing, which I think it's a healthy
Good.
thing.
Well, and giving our context in Seattle, who are still healing from not just one but multiple,
Right.
like monarchs of pastors,
Yeah, large churches.
who a few people have all the say,
Yeah.
and unfortunately have ruptured relationship and trust. So the hope is that by the diversification of the people and authority, God gets to work through all the methodologies
Right.
and all the iterations of himself through his people,
Yeah.
which is just neat.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we're seeing some of that. I mean, it's taken some time, but, just to use terminology that's really familiar, like we see introverts speaking up, we see
Yeah.
people who would never walk up to a microphone on one of our Spirit-led first Sundays of the month, where we have an extended period of time of response. We are
So even
hearing,
house church is bleeding into Sunday.
right. I mean, we hear stories of, some of our house churches having non-Christians who have not professed faith but desperately need community coming and sitting in and then participating. And I mean, I don't know, people might be really concerned with this, but like I'm pretty sure we've had non-Christians pray like out loud at our services here on Sundays of like,
because God doesn't hear, people who aren't professing.
Right, something like that. And I think that's great. And so I just think the more communal, the more, I mean, nobody's curious who the pastors are here, and nobody second guesses who's leading some operational things and making decisions.
Right.
But there's just an intentional, like, we're going to like let go and forego some of the like traditional feel of like authority and structure to allow the church to operate in what we think is like the most healthy way for the church to operate.
Up to this point, most of this conversation has lived inside the church. What we haven't named yet is how all this feels to people who are curious or skeptical or wounded by the church, especially in the Northwest. This next part of the conversation turns outward, not towards convincing, but towards creating space, towards hospitality, toward an invitation to what God's doing.
As a church model, we wanted to shift away from the centrality of the stage, of singular personalities, and move that towards the table and a plethora of voices and a raising up of leadership in the saints to do the work of the ministry. And one of the questions that answered for us was in the Northwest, people don't want necessarily to come into a church building. There's like a weird stigma. I literally heard people say like, well, I can't step in that church door, I'll burst into flames.
Yeah, right.
Can we try that? That'd be kind of really interesting to see that happen.
Right. We could start charging money for those things then,
Right? You're like, watch the fire burn. No.
Right.
But yeah, what have you found in this last season that other people who aren't, quote unquote Christians, or people who are questioning the ability for them to come and to interact around a table versus a stage?
Yeah, whether you like it or not, and even though the church is called to teach, and there's value to that, the come in and sit down and watch someone on a stage it just screams like dogmatic. It screams,
right.
We know something that you need to know. How many of us love being told we're wrong or we're supposed to think or believe something?
A few of us like it.
Right.
And then the majority of us do not.
Right.
Maybe that's something we need to look back in
right.
for some counseling.
Certainly an extra dose of humility would be helpful. And yet there's something inside of our body that resists that. And so, if the church wants to be a place where it's not a country club for people who follow Christ, but it's like a place where other people can come and find purpose and meaning and community and healing and all of those things, then there needs to be like literal physical spaces and metaphorical spaces.
Take it off the top shelf, put it at the bottom.
Yeah, for those people to like exist. Which also means there needs to be space to throw out the question that they want to ask, but they are certain is not welcome on a Sunday morning gathering. Right. There needs to be space for disagreement. There needs to be space where like ideas can be thrown on the table, and none of those are wrong just because they're odd or different or unique. And so like that, just the way that the Western evangelical church is organized, that can't happen on a Sunday.
Right. Even if you have a panel we're gonna have a discussion, which is already unique.
Yeah.
Even then, I'm gonna ask my question in front of 100 other people or more.
Right.
There's no way.
Right.
But 6 people who I've been having dinner with for 6 months, 100%.
Yeah. There's just like a safety and a little bit more freedom in a different context. I mean, I think someone told me once, food is like the international language. Mm-hmm. Everyone speaks, I'm hungry. And so, but not everyone speaks, come and sit down and then stand up when scripture's read and then, raise your hands in worship when people are like, do I give them a high five or what are they doing with their hands?
Right. Or I think my favorite was we had a friend who visited that was not at all remotely Christian, and like he left and was talking to the person who invited him, and he's like, why was everyone hail Hitlering?
Oh yeah, seriously.
I was like,
It's embarrassing.
oh my gosh, like I see what you're saying.
Or communion is really confusing to lots of people. Like it, you know.
We're gonna eat his flesh and drink his blood. Yes, we are
Right.
all vampires.
Yeah. So, you know, just the table in the house church is a more inviting place for a lot of people. And that might sound bad to say, but just, you know, I think.
Right. Our culture, our context, like this is, come have a meal with me. Come have a drink with me.
Right.
Come, like way more approachable.
And I think, you know, I don't know, there's risk of this coming off the wrong way. But we live in like a really diverse, from a racial, ethnic perspective. And as someone who's lived, you know, almost a decade of my life in Latin America, food is inviting. Being in someone's home is like your family. You're like, you're one of us. And so in a context where there's just a lot of racial and ethnic diversity, a lot of people have moved from outside the US to this region for work, and it, so to speak, like it speaks their language of, you know, being together around a meal and a table. So
Right.
it's not manipulative or coercive, it's strategic, and it's actually, I think, honoring to people who that like means a lot to. So
Well, in a culture where people come home from work, they drive into their garage, the garage shuts, and they don't come out until they go back to work.
right.
To say, hey, come over to my house. Like that's like that step alone is massive.
Yeah.
And it just, I mean, if Jesus is the example, if he's like the true human, what did he do? He did go to the synagogue. He did teach and preach. He did have open air like dialogues with thousands of people. Like there is that reality.
Right.
But the majority of his meetings were, hey, I'm coming to your house. You ready?
Right.
And it's over meals, and he got yelled at for hanging out with the improper crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for too long, the church has tried to convince instead of invite. And I think there's maybe some similarity there, but there's a significant difference between like, I'm going to tell you something that I want you to believe versus I'm going to invite you to be part of a community as you explore. And I don't know, I think we're past the point in certain contexts of convincing shouldn't be the first step. Invitation should be the first step. If someone wants explanation and convincing, then let's let them invite that.
Right.
Let's just love them.
The table is ready for those questions.
Hey, so if you made it this far into our rant, thanks for watching. And if this conversation stirred something in you, either curiosity or resistance or hope, or even you watched it and you're like, these guys are nuts and I completely disagree with them, that's okay. We don't think faith grows best through answers alone. We think it grows through relationship, presence, and some really honest and good conversations. So if you're curious, table's open, not to convince you, but to walk with you. So hit us up, and we'll see you next time.